Whether you're the person that doesn't have time to sleep or loves sleeping and gets as much sleep as you want, you still want to make sure you're getting good quality sleep. And I'm willing to bet that there are some things that you're doing that you do not realize are killing your sleep. So I'm going to go over 7 of the key things that you're probably doing that are destroying your sleep. Number 1 is using artificial light. So one of the things that helps drive our sleep is our body's melatonin. Melatonin is basically this sleep hormone that builds up throughout the day, and it helps control our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is basically our body's internal clock. And as we go on throughout the day, this melatonin will build up. And specifically, this melatonin will build up in response to darkness. So if you look at a graph, you'll see that the melatonin peaks a lot towards the evening time and nighttime. And this melatonin doesn't actually put you to sleep, but it's more of like an alarm. And once this melatonin peaks, that's like our first initiation to start sleeping. Now the problem is artificial light can really delay our production of melatonin. Because for our ancestors, once the sun went down, that means our activities went down too. Yeah, they had fire and sometimes that would help them with certain other activities, but it was really limited because there are just practical limitations with having a fire versus having a whole street that's lit up. So having a fire really didn't affect people's circadian rhythms that much compared to what we have now. Nowadays, people's circadian rhythms usually get affected about 2 to 3 hours because of this artificial light. And this is something that can mimic insomnia. Because once that artificial light is gone, it still takes time for that melatonin to start rising up so that you can go to sleep. Now you may think that there has to be a ton of light for it to really affect your circadian rhythm, but even a small bedside lamp has been shown to suppress melatonin. And actually we've seen even as low as 8 to 10 lux of light affecting people's melatonin. Now just for some reference, 8 to 10 lux is barely anything. Even the smallest bedside lamps will still produce about 20 to 80 lux. And most people are not exposed to just a small bedside lamp. Most people will have the TV on, their laptop open, they'll be looking at their phone, and be looking at a lot of blue light. Now, if you think that your melatonin is already suppressed from that simple lamp, it's going to be way worse from those blue lights that are being emitted from your phone and your other screens. Our receptors in our eyes that communicate whether or not it's daytime to our brain are especially susceptible to those shorter wavelength lights. And that's exactly what those blue lights are. Even when the lux amount is the same as the yellow lights, the blue lights will suppress melatonin twice as much. Now, one really common habit a lot of people have is staring at their phone right before they're about to go to sleep. Now, this study was looking at exactly what that will do to your sleep. They were comparing people either reading an ebook on an iPad or reading a physical book before they went to sleep. Not surprisingly, the people that read the iPad took longer to fall asleep versus the people that just read the printed book. But also their sleep quality got worse. Specifically, the people that read the iPad had a lot less REM sleep than the people that read the physical book. Your REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, is part of your sleep cycle. So you have these 90-minute sleep cycles, and at the end of those sleep cycles is where you get this REM sleep. And it gets the name rapid eye movement because people's eyes are literally darting back and forth when they're in this stage of sleep. And this is where a lot of your dreaming occurs. They also found that the iPad users were less rested and they felt sleepier throughout the day compared to the book readers. And the last thing they found was even after these iPad users stopped, for days after, they still had a 90-minute lag in their melatonin release. So they still had a 90-minute delay in their circadian rhythm, even though they stopped using the iPads. So it's kind of like a digital hangover that lasts multiple days. Now, I'm not saying to abandon all artificial lights and to never use your cell phone again, because that's obviously not possible. But there are some simple tips that you can start doing. So the first is going to be keep your bedroom as dark as possible. Like I said, even having a small amount of light, like 8 to 10 lux, can suppress your melatonin. So any sort of artificial light that's in your room, I would highly suggest you find a way to get rid of it. You can also turn on night mode on your phones and other screens, and this will also limit some of that blue light that's being emitted. And obviously, if you just limit the amount of use of your phone as much as possible before you go to sleep, just so you don't expose yourself to that artificial light. Now, something else you can try is get as much sunlight as you can throughout the daytime. This other study found that if you expose yourself to sunlight during the daytime, it can actually help negate some of those harmful effects that come from looking at your phone or tablet at nighttime. So in other words, if you get a lot of sunlight exposure during the daytime, it can prevent your melatonin suppression at nighttime. So basically the study was similar to last time, where they had these people either read a physical book or an iPad or an e-reader before they went to sleep. But the only difference was they had a lot of sunlight exposure during the daytime, and they found much less melatonin suppression when they actually had the sunlight during the daytime. Now, the second thing that's affecting your sleep is your temperature. Your temperature is, I think, one of the biggest things that is affecting your sleep for two reasons. One is people really don't focus on it too much, and number two is it actually makes a big difference. So to successfully initiate sleep, our core body temperature has to drop about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. So this is why it's a lot easier to sleep in a room where it's too cold versus when a room is too hot. So surprisingly, the ideal bedroom temperature for most people is going to be about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is actually how our sleeping patterns evolved, because our sleeping patterns evolved from the eastern parts of Africa. And over here, the temperatures would range a lot throughout the day. So in the summers, the temperatures would fluctuate about 12 degrees in a single day. And in the winter, they would fluctuate about 14 degrees. But now with our thermostats, we have this constant temperature at all times. And that's why we can suppress our melatonin release when we don't get this fluctuating temperatures, because our brains do not get that cooling sensation. You can also try taking a warm shower or going in the sauna at nighttime, because what happens is that hot shower or the sauna will bring all the blood to the surface of your skin and dilate your blood vessels. But when you get out of the shower or out of the sauna, then those dilated blood vessels will release a lot of your inner heat. And this will help drop your core body temperature to help you initiate sleep. And there was also a study on this. So this study found that healthy adults that took a hot bath before they went to bed got about 10 to 15% more of their deep NREM sleep. And just so you know, deep NREM and REM sleep are two stages of people's sleeping cycles that people struggle getting the most. And if you want to focus on cooling your body, 3 areas you want to focus on are your hands, your feet, and your head, because most of the thermic work in our body is being done in these 3 areas. So one tip that I like to do is to stick 1 foot outside my blanket when it gets a little too hot. Now, number 3 is alcohol. Alcohol is something that will fragment your sleep, meaning your whole night is going to be filled with these brief periods of being awake. So you don't get that continuous bout of sleep. So you don't get a lot of those healing and restoring benefits of sleep. Also, alcohol lowers your REM sleep. Actually, alcohol is one of the most powerful suppressors of REM sleep that we know of. And the reason for this is when your body metabolizes alcohol, it produces byproducts called aldehydes and ketones. Now, these aldehydes specifically will block the brain's ability to generate REM sleep. And what we find is in alcoholics, we get this very severe buildup from this lack of REM sleep. And they can start getting these hallucinations during the daytime while they're awake. It's basically their REM sleep's kind of leaking out. We also see effects on a baby if a pregnant lady is drinking. Now, everyone knows that you're not supposed to drink when you're pregnant. But what about just having like 1 or 2 glasses of wine? Well, surprisingly, they were able to do a study on this, and they found that having 2 glasses of wine when you're pregnant will significantly lower the amount of REM sleep that unborn baby is getting. Now, number 4 is caffeine. Now, caffeine is bad for your sleep because of a different reason. It's because it blocks the adenosine receptors in your brain. So your adenosine is this molecule that builds up throughout the day, and it's basically your body's sleep pressure. So the longer that you were awake, the more adenosine that you get built up. And the more adenosine that you have, the more sleepy you will feel. Now, the reason that caffeine works is because it prevents you from feeling sleepy. And the way it does that is by blocking these adenosine receptors so that your adenosine, even though it's building up, it doesn't affect your brain. Now, the problem with caffeine is that it has an extremely high half-life. So if you drink 100 milligrams of caffeine at about 6 p.m., that means that 50 milligrams of that caffeine is still going to be in your system at midnight when you're trying to sleep. Now, even having that little bit of caffeine in your system can throw off your sleep. And even if you do end up falling asleep, that sleep will not be the best quality. And this also gets affected by age. The older you are, the more sensitive you are to caffeine, and the harder it is for your body to clear away caffeine. So you're more likely to have this caffeine disrupt your sleep the older you are. So I'm not going to tell you to completely get rid of your coffee, but I would recommend drinking it earlier in the day and try to finish it by noon if possible. And I'd also recommend to try not drinking too much, because just know that the more caffeine you have right now, 6 hours later, half of that caffeine is still going to be in your system. Number 5 is sleeping pills. So these hypnotic pills are often prescribed for people that have insomnia. But the problem is these sleeping medications do not produce anything close to natural sleep, and they'll actually make your sleep worse. There's actually not a single sleeping pill on the market that will help produce natural sleep. Now, while people may seem like they're sleeping when they take a sleeping pill, it's actually more of a sedative than anything else. So sleeping pills will target the same part of the brain that alcohol does, because they're both sedatives. Now, if you compare someone on a sleeping pill like Ambien, and you compare that person to someone who's naturally getting deep sleep, you'll see that their brain waves are extremely different. This study was a randomized control trial, and they found that the brain waves you get from sleeping pills are lacking in the deepest brain waves. In other words, you don't get that deep sleep when you're taking a sleeping pill. Now, one major benefit we get from natural sleep is our improvement in our memories. Now, you don't get these benefits when you take a sleeping pill. So researchers from the University of Pennsylvania actually tested this, and they took these animals and they gave them either a weight-appropriate dose of Ambien or they gave them a placebo. And they were looking at their brain activity while they were sleeping, and they found that the animals that had the natural sleep, they could actually see their memories being solidified. But when they were on the sleeping medication, they didn't see that. Actually, the animals that had the sleeping medication, their memories got about 50% worse. So not only did it not improve their memories, it actively weakened their memories. Now, the other problem with sleeping medications is you get a lot of side effects. Some of the most common side effects are having daytime grogginess, forgetfulness, and slower reaction times. Now, it's kind of like a never-ending cycle, because now that you have these side effects, you're more likely to need the sleeping medication again to help you sleep. Or you're going to reach for that caffeine, which is also going to affect your sleep and make it worse. Now, another problem with these sleeping medications is something called rebound insomnia. That's basically, as soon as you stop taking these medications, your sleep is going to get way worse at first. And the reason for this is just like any drug, your brain gets more dependent on it. And the more and more of this medication that you're taking, the less sensitive your brain is to it. This is exactly what the withdrawal process will look like from any drug. And actually, most of the sleeping medications now are in the class of physically addictive drugs. So I would recommend a non-pharma way to improve your sleep first if you're thinking about taking a sleeping medication. So we talked about quite a few already in this video, and we're going to talk about a couple more. But another thing you can try taking is ashwagandha. This meta-analysis found that taking an ashwagandha supplement can help adults both with and without insomnia. Now, more specifically, people who took ashwagandha were able to fall asleep faster and have better sleep quality and spend less time awake in bed. So their sleep efficiency improved a lot. Number 6 is your breathing. Now, there's a lot of different methods you can do to try to improve your sleep, but if you're not focusing on your breathing as well, then you're going to be missing out on a lot of ways to improve your sleep. Sleep apnea and sleep disordered breathing are real problems that are affecting not just adults, but also children. And when you're not breathing properly, that means you're not going to be getting quality oxygen supply to your brain. And that also means you're not getting as much of that deep restorative sleep. So if you snore, or you're waking up groggy, or you're waking up with your mouth open and there's drool everywhere, these are just a few signs that you are not sleeping well. So 2 simple things you can start doing right now are using a mouth tape and a nasal dilator strip. Because what you want to focus on is trying to breathe through your nose all night long. Because we have a ton of evidence that shows that when you're breathing through your nose as opposed to your mouth, it can really lower the symptoms of sleep apnea and also improve the amount of oxygen that's going to your organs and your brain. So the mouth tape that I like to use is called a 3M micropore paper tape, which is basically a medical grade tape. All you do is rip off a little piece and tape it over your lips, and really any nasal dilator strip can work. There's also these internal dilators that can kind of hook on the inside of your nose. Those will work pretty good too. Now, I did make some other videos talking more about breathing and how to improve your breathing, especially if you struggle breathing through your nose. So I'm putting a link to that in the description below, so make sure you check that out. But sometimes all the home remedies are simply not enough, and you have some anatomical limitation or some other problem that doing something at home will just not fix the problem. So sometimes you need to get a sleep study, sometimes you have to get a CPAP machine, sometimes you have to get a surgery done. All of these things are possible, and you'll only know them when you really start looking into it and get it tested. But you definitely do not want to wait on this, because these are problems that do not fix itself. If you have sleep apnea, it's not just going to magically fix itself one day. Actually, what the studies show is it continues to get worse over time, because it constantly will invoke this chronic inflammation and this chronic stress in your body that will continue to make it worse and worse. Now, number 7 and the last thing on my list is something you can't really prevent. It is getting old. Now, the older you get, the worse your sleep will get, but you still need it. Now, we often think that older people simply don't need as much sleep, but if you look at the data, that's simply not true. What actually happens is older people still need the same amount of sleep. They just struggle generating it. And what studies have also shown is when you artificially enhance elder people's amount of sleep, they actually benefit from it. Now, one reason that older people struggle sleeping long enough is because your circadian rhythm actually shifts backwards the older you get. So a lot of older people try to push their boundaries and stay up later, and you'll find them falling asleep on the couch watching a movie, or falling asleep at a social gathering or something like that. And a lot of people think it's funny, but it's actually something that they can't avoid because their circadian rhythm has been pushed back. And the problem here is they're going to have a harder time sleeping once they actually get in bed. And the reason for that is once you fall asleep for a bit on a couch or something like that, then part of that adenosine, that sleep pressure molecule, will be kind of taken away, because now that you've taken that brief nap while on the couch, now you've cleared away some of that adenosine in your brain. Now, when you try to go to bed and actually go to sleep properly, since you have some of that sleep pressure eaten away, it's going to be a lot harder to initiate that sleep. Now, this is true for pretty much anyone, but it's especially true for older people because they already have a harder time generating sleep as it is. But too many people will attribute this to something like insomnia. But I'm willing to bet that a lot of people that think they have insomnia, when they start going to bed when they feel drowsy and actually try to follow their own circadian rhythm, that they'll start to see a lot of improvements. Now, that being said, you can make some modifications to help kind of push your circadian rhythm back a little bit. So one modification for elderly people is to start wearing sunglasses as you go outside in the morning. But then in the afternoon, you can go back outside without the sunglasses. Now, you can still have some sun protection, like wearing a hat or some sunscreen and stuff like that, but don't wear the sunglasses. What this does is it will help delay your circadian rhythm because you're basically delaying that sun exposure to your eyes. Another consideration for elderly people is to start taking melatonin at nighttime. Now, this is something you'd obviously want to discuss with your doctor, but for most healthy young people, I really think that there's no need most of the time for melatonin unless there's some jet lag issue or flight situation like that. But for elderly people, it's been shown to really help improve their sleep. So I hope you like watching that video. If there's any other tips you had or any things that you find that really is destroying your sleep that I didn't mention, make sure you let me know in the comment section below. Have you ever thought, man, I wish I was more attractive, but unfortunately there's nothing I can do about it? Well, how much of our genetics actually plays into our appearance? Well, probably a lot. I mean, it is our genes. But does that mean that no matter what we do, that we can never change our appearance? Obviously no, right? Like if someone goes to the gym and they start working out, obviously